Why don't you go over the fast and the holiday that we just had, Rab?
Oh,
Is there
boy.
just
All right.
I want to try to get people in.
So the 17th of Tammuz it's actually an optional fast. It's clearly one of the minor fasts. I have a whole video on fasting and when it's required. People think that every fast is required, including micro fasts like the fast of Esther, which is even less popular than the 17th of Tammuz. There were actually hundreds of fasts. There's a book that's older than the Gemara itself. It's called Megillus Tainus. It brings down all the fasts of the Jewish people, and that also doesn't cover all the fasts. The thing is, with the advent of the melting pot of Judaism, of all different customs and cultures, especially when it comes to formulating Sidurim, they've included the fast of pretty much every culture. That now people, in an attempt to be more pious, try to fast as much as they can, and they don't even know why they're fasting, which is the stupidest thing you could do. The vast majority of people who keep the fast in Jewish life don't know why they're fasting. But they just know that it's popular to walk into shul with a somber face and like, I'm fasting. There's no point. So what's the halacha? The halacha is that in times of shmad, in times of persecution, all these fasts are mandatory. Now, mandatory to what extent? There's no Sanhedrin to adjudicate who's fasting and who's not fasting, right? But it means that they should be kept. In times of shalom, of peace, these fasts are not obligatory. However, in times where it's Ein Shmad and Ein Shalom, that means that it's not a time of peace and it's not a time of persecution, it's somewhere in the middle, then these fasts are optional. But it says in the prophet Zechariah, even before the second temple was built, that the fast that they were fasting back then, they were going to do away with. And this is the fast of the fourth month. Like many people say that it refers to the fast that was observed today. It's actually observed partially. The reason it's observed partially in the sense of instead of a 25-hour fast, it's a half-day fast. It's because of that simple reason. People don't ask that. Because a fast is supposed to be kept just like Yom Kippur, just like Tisha B'Av. The reason it's kept partially, it's because the rabbis acknowledge that it's not really necessary. So people don't know that. They think, what are you talking about? Of course it's necessary, but we keep it half the day because it's kept from sun up to sundown because it's our custom to do it. Nonsense. It's because they know it's not obligatory. But it's frowned upon. If you go to yeshiva and you try not to fast, I don't know, they'll kick you out. I remember when I was in yeshiva in Israel, this fast introduced the 3 weeks. So during the 3 weeks, you're supposed to be in a state of avelut, of mourning, which means you're not allowed to listen to music, you're not allowed to shave your beard, you're not allowed to cut your hair or whatever. Now, that's not a law. That's a custom. Nowhere in the Talmud does it say to do this. Nowhere in the Mishnah does it say to do this. Nowhere in the Rambam does it say to do this. Right? But they wouldn't let people get haircuts. I remember I was like the yeshiva barber. I used to cut people's hair. I had my trusty clippers. I would give everyone like a nice little fade in the bathroom. Just that's what I did in the army. In the army, I was like the barracks barber. I mean, I was in the infantry. I wasn't a barber, but I would cut people's hair in the army. That's what I did in yeshiva also. But they told me don't cut anyone's hair because we're supposed to be mourning. All right, whatever. There's no law. It's a shame that people don't know why they're actually mourning for, which is the stupidest reason to mourn. It's the stupidest reason to fast. If you don't know why you're fasting, don't fast because you're not supposed to be miserable. You're not supposed to be in a somber state. In Judaism, we only really mourn the dead. We don't just mourn stam just because we see some rabbi mourn. But nowadays, unfortunately, to be more primitive is to seem more religious. It's funny. I was watching a Rabbi Reuven class today, and I was trying to see what's the big difference between what he does and what I do. Because he doesn't lie. I mean, these guys are not liars. Everything they're saying, there's a source for, right? So what's the difference? I mean, everything I'm saying, there's a source for also. So how do we really differ? And I have realized that we cater to a different audience. Now, clearly, like if you listen to them, they're going to be, for sure, you have to fast. Not only that, you should probably extend the fast according to these people. Now, why? How can I give you one set of instructions, one type of advice, and they'll give you another type of advice, and we're both teaching Judaism here? The thing is, they make no distinction between what's optional and what's obligatory. They make no distinction. They don't even mention that it might possibly be optional. I've never even heard that come out of, I mean, forget about them, just anyone else who teaches on YouTube, the notion of optional. They're like, no, if I'm telling you to do it, it's because that's the way it is. For example, before we started the show, there wasn't really another show that would try to answer people's questions. I mean, about all of Judaism. I'm not talking about Christianity. There are people who do that in the kind of missionary world, but just in general, an open platform where you can debate a rabbi and ask questions, this and that. But since we started doing this, other people have followed suit, and now there's even a Stump the Rabbi series. A few people have that. I think that's a great thing. I think dialogues are how people learn the best. The major difference between what they do and what I do is that the vast majority of the questions that are asked to me, I'll just say, I don't know. Because the truth is, we don't know. I don't answer questions that are subjective because you're asking me a question to know what's true. But if something's not true, I'm not going to give you an answer. What I could say is maybe this rabbi says this and that rabbi says that, but we don't really know. They'll never say that. They'll give you an answer and you have to take it. Take it. That's it. If you don't like the answer, tune out. And that's the major difference between what we do and what they do. We're not seeking power and we're not seeking authority. I mean, I am seeking a sort of influence because I want more people to view Judaism in this manner. Everyone who showed up tonight is in search for truth. And whenever you ask a teacher a question, you want the most truthful answer he could give or that exists. If somebody asks me a question on something that is not concrete, right? Anything, does God like this? How does God view sin? I'm not going to answer a question like that. I'll be like, I don't know. Who knows? But they'll give you an answer. There's many people who like that, but people have to run away from that form of thinking because it's primitive. You don't want an answer unless it's truthful because that's how silly customs and weird offshoots take off by people running on opinion. I'm not here to give you guys opinion. Now, if it's a fully subjective manner, I'll give you the opinion of different rabbis and let you make up your own mind. But I'm not going to tell you, Rashi says this, and if Rashi said it, it's like God said it, right? I mean, James just came out with a video with a picture of me on the cover, and I guess he was criticizing me because I have that approach that if you don't agree with what Rashi had to say or with what the Meiri, the Ibn Ezra, or Sargon, and if you don't agree on something that's subjective, like interpreting scripture, you don't have to go by what they teach. You can go by what someone else teaches. Or if you're knowledgeable enough, you could make your own interpretation and publish that. What's wrong with that? Now, if someone is stuck and saying, no, you can't disagree with Rashi, it means that you only really study Rashi because there's many times that Rashi is what's called the Dat Yachid. He does his own thing. And hey, I do my own thing. There's other people who do their own thing. You know, but to criticize someone else because you happen to disagree with the Ibn Ezra or Rashi, it means like, look, you can't agree with everyone, okay? Especially when we're limited to 5 books. If we're studying the Parsha and there's only 5 books and whatever, like 55 Parshiot or 56, there's going to be different opinions on what a pasuk means. They both can't be right. They all can't be right. Now, if you can't acknowledge that, then you're worshiping rabbis. You're venerating these people, and you don't even give a crap whether there is consensus on what they're teaching. I could respect someone because of their vast knowledge in many different areas, but I have to acknowledge that they could make a mistake. And I would have to give you guys the right to disagree with a rabbi here and there. I mean, these guys are flesh and blood. On top of that, these guys didn't sit on the Sanhedrin, and you could even disagree with rabbis from the Sanhedrin. You couldn't disobey the collective ruling of a bunch of judges saying that we should keep ceremonial law in a collective form in a certain manner. That you can do. But in terms of disagreeing and saying, I don't agree, you could do that all day long. If you wanted to live in Israel, they're the bosses, right? They're not going to tell you how to worship God, but they'll tell you what you have to do in the collective, even though there's no sincerity within it. You just go through the motions or don't leave your house then. But better yet, don't live in the land of Israel like if you have a problem with what the great court decides. But if you really wanted to live pure Judaism, I remember back in the day, there was these little bracelets, the WWJD, remember that? That what would Yeshka do? We should have like WWHD. What would Hillel do? Or like, what would Rabbi Akiva do? Now, why are these guys important? Is because they existed before the Gemara. They appear in what's called the Mishnah. If we would keep Judaism the way they kept Judaism, they wouldn't let you in any synagogue today. Now, clearly there's areas I disagree with synagogues, and then they still let me in because I'm respectful and I do what everyone else does, right? Like, even though at home, on my Shabbos table, I make the distinction between what's obligatory and what's not. But if we kept Judaism, like here, for example, Hillel never got drunk on Purim because the custom to get drunk on Purim was instituted by the time of the Amoraim. It doesn't appear in the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva didn't get drunk on Purim. Go further. Hillel didn't mourn during the 3 weeks. He took haircuts. The question is, what would the Tanaim have done? Because they were the only ones who had smicha. They were the only ones who lived during the time of the temple. There really has to be a work done. I mean, if you guys are thinking about something to do, everyone is always thinking, how can they contribute to the Jewish community? What book can they write that hasn't been written? There's many books that haven't been written, but someone should write a codification of Jewish law based on Mishnaic literature, only on Mishnaic literature. Now, that doesn't appear in any codification that we have today, because even in Mishnah Torah, like, he brings down the works of the Geonim as halacha. I guess most people don't know that. He brings down the statements of the Amoraim as halacha. He elsewhere says in the same Mishnah Torah that Torah Sheba'al Peh comes from the Beis Din HaGadol in Yerushalayim, which means not anyone in the Gemara, but only the Tanaim, because they were the only ones who had smicha. They were the only ones who lived during the time of the Second Temple. But I think he was also pandering to the leaders of his community, saying, like, look, I'm just like you. I know the Gemara, so I'm going to give you what you want in a codified form. But I think in the back of his mind, he was frustrated, thinking like, boy, we're really overburdening the Jewish people with things that aren't halacha, because the halacha, again, comes from the Mishnah and books of Mishnaic times and before, like the Braitot. Within the Braitot, you have the Toseftot and the Sefra, the Sefri, the Mechilta, and I guess even older books like Megillas Tainus and stuff like that. But no one has really, I guess because it's not popular. It's not popular to come out with, I guess it's not appropriate to say Judaism light, but rather Judaism pure. If the goal is to live like the people we call Chazal, the rabbis in the Mishnah, then, you know, there's a lot of stuff we do nowadays that they didn't do back then. And I'm not saying it's bad to do, but I'm just saying that we should know the difference, because there's many people when they come to Judaism and they're kind of a bit overwhelmed and saying like, boy, you guys have so many laws. I've never heard a rabbi really be sympathetic to the fact that, yes, there are a lot of laws, and they'll take the person aside and, you know what, as long as you keep the halacha, all this other stuff's optional. I never really heard them say that. They're like, well, love it or leave it. It's all or nothing. And it's not really like that. I've performed a lot of conversions with different rabbis of different groups, and I've heard rabbis tell the people that I've converted, you know, in the water, that they have to accept the commandments created by rabbis today. I'm like, look at this guy torturing my converts. It shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't. Like, what would Rabbi Akiva do? What would Hillel do? Like, what would Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? All these rabbis who existed before what's called the Churban, the destruction of the Second Temple, they were the ones who transmitted Torah Sheba'al Peh, and it pretty much died with them. And then the Amoraim were just commentators to what they wrote, right? And Amara is someone who quoted Tanaim. This is why Amoraim don't disagree with Tanaim. And Tanaim were rabbis who basically quoted Braitot by memory. It all had to do with the court. I just wish people taught it like this more. And there aren't too many people, even people that I do look up to, like rabbis like Rabbi David Bar Chaim, Rabbi Chaim Ovadia, I guess the late Rabbi Joseph Or. Although they present a rational form of Judaism, they don't really give people the building blocks to help them decipher Judaism on their own. And that's really, I think, the job of every rabbi, to bring everyone to where he's at. And that's what I try to do. I'm trying to give you the tools so you can go into a Shabbos table and have a serious discussion. And it's really like a game of chess. You could checkmate these guys. It's not just who could quote anything by memory. There's things that outweigh other things. You know, like if someone quotes a minhag of the Amoraim and you bring down an open close page of the Mishnah, they're going to know this carries more weight, or at least people who know the difference. But that's it's not taught like that. I've heard the students of people like David Katz and stuff quote Rabbi Soloveitchik to say why they believe a metaphysical concept, and that should end the discussion. Now, in the timeline, people who lived 100 years ago are on the level of what's called achronim. Just let me give you the timeline, although it doesn't really cover everyone. But from the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, that was Ezra and their guys. The second group is called Zugot. That was the time that the Sanhedrin was ruled by pairs, Shammai, Avtalion, Hillel, and Shammai. And then after that, it was Tanaim. And after Simicha disappeared and the destruction of the temple, there arose the era of the Amoraim. After the Amoraim is the area of the Savarim, which are basically the ones who compiled the Gemara. After the Savarim, the power laid in the hands of Geonim. I guess people don't mention the Reish Galuta because he also had a big part in it as well. But the two heads of the Jewish community at that time were the heads of the Babylonian yeshivot, the two schools in Surah and Pumbavita. They were called Geonim. After that is the era of the Rishonim. That's we got Rambam, Rashi. The end of the Rishonim was with the closing of Shulchan Aruch. So for Yosef Karo, I guess is half a Rishon, half Achron. So after the Rishonim is the Achronim, and that's where we are nowadays. I mean, some people say that the Achronim ended after the Holocaust, but all these stages were created later on. Atana didn't really know he was, well, perhaps maybe Atana did, but Amoraim didn't know they were Amoraim. Geonim didn't know, well, they were Geonim because they were the heads of the two Babylonian yeshivot, but the way Geonim are understood nowadays, they classify anyone who lived at that time as Geonim, but it's not true. Rav Tzadok Gaon, he's called the Gaon because he was one of the heads of the two Babylonian yeshivot. But all these things were classified later, and it's good that it's classified to a certain extent. So you're able to know what authority that person had. Clearly, the Rishonim didn't have the authority of men who had smicha, but they're understood as the first codifiers of halakha. Rambam, the Rosh, the Rif, Shulchan Aruch, which is the Rav Yosef Karo. So they're called the Rishonim because they were the first ones to codify halakha. But anyways, all right.
I really appreciate that. That was a nice breakdown and introduction, I guess, to the video for tonight.